You are tuning in to Fabulous and Fortunate, a Monáe's Musings production. Greetings and welcome back to another episode of Fabulous and Fortunate, the sacred space where we unravel, rewild, and remember who we are. I'm your host, Amayah Monáe, an artist, a transitional life coach, and possibly your favorite intuitive homegirl, walking with you on this beautiful and messy journey of self-reclamation. Today's episode is one I've been sitting on for a minute. We are discussing attuning to our wildness and normalizing this in our everyday life. I want you to just take a deep breath with me really quickly. Inhale deep and exhale slow. Let yourself land there, not in the version of you who has it all together, not in the version of you who's palatable and polished, but in the version of you who knows, who feels, who's maybe even a little chaotic, a little untamable, but still deeply alive. Because that version of you, that's the one the world needs, and that's the one you need. So I briefly want to talk about the wild woman archetype. A lot of us, or a lot of people, might treat her like a costume, like some witchy aesthetic you can try on during retrogrades, eclipse seasons, or when the moon is in Scorpio. And don't get me wrong, I love a good astro moment. I mean, look at this podcast. I'll light a candle and pull up my chart really quick. But the wild woman isn't a vibe. She's a return, a coming home to the parts of us that got exiled, possibly by religion, possibly by family, possibly by capitalism, and honestly, let's be honest, possibly by ourselves, when we started performing instead of just being. So, let's get into why so many women feel disconnected or even dismissive of this wild woman energy. We are typically taught to fear our own power, to see our rage as unhealed, to see sensuality as doing too much or being a Jezebel, to think softness means weakness and strength means stoicism. Isn't it wild how we've been conditioned to see our deepest instincts, our knowings, our fire, our ability to say no without an explanation as dangerous? I remember a time when I was trying to make myself smaller in every way. I was so polite. I was so palatable. I was so people-pleasing. I was always saying yes when I meant heck no. And just allowing people to mistreat me without doing anything about it, until one day I looked in the mirror and did not recognize myself. I had lost my wild and I was absolutely exhausted. And that's when I realized being tamed was the actual abuse. Taming who I really was, taming the wildness inside of me that wanted to be let free. And I feel like a lot of us unconsciously put ourselves into a cage and we wonder why we just feel stuck. We wonder why we're not moving forward in our endeavors. We're not moving forward in anything that we want to move forward. And I really think the reason is because we're trying to tame our wild. We're trying to tame who we really are, to be more palatable, to be more accepted, and to be liked. You know, in this world now with social media and likes and putting yourself out there and kind of doing things for the applause, it takes you out of who you really are when you start to do things because you want people to like it more or you want to get more likes. So you're trying to be appealing to a larger audience. But I believe that's when we first start to give away our power. If you're constantly chasing validation and constantly chasing for people to like you, don't you think that in some essence and in some time, you're going to lose parts of yourself and lose parts of your wild? You know, I think about it that way. I'm thinking, well, if I'm trying to be so palatable and likable, where does that leave room for the real me to come out? Where does that leave room for my authentic self, my wild self, who just trusts herself deeply, trusts her purpose, trusts her path, and doesn't let people lead her astray? So, next, I want to go into what it means to be a wild woman. Number one, she trusts herself deeply, her intuition, her body, and her timing, even when the world tries to convince her otherwise. Number two, she honors her emotions as sacred messengers, not inconveniences to be silenced. Her joy is just as holy as her rage. And number three, she chooses freedom over fitting in, knowing that her liberation creates permission for others to reclaim theirs as well. The wild woman is not loud for attention. She's loud because she finally stopped whispering to survive. I have never fit in, and I'm not saying this in like a quirky, like, oh my God, I'm different than all the other girls, but like literally, I have never fit in with my peers. Like literally, everyone in my family knows it. You know, everyone I talk to, they knows it. They're like, you just never fit in with your peers and people around you. And I used to really want to fit in. I'm like, why do I feel so different? And not in a quirky way, but in like, I feel bad about myself way because I don't see myself in anyone else. And I realized it's because I've always just been authentically me, and I've always just been myself. I've always been like that. Even when I was younger, I was just always myself, and I always kind of marched to the beat of my own drum. But I think it's because even when I was younger, I just attuned to my wildness, and I never let myself be silenced. And I think in turn, it kind of led to me being the woman I am today, where I'm just very sure of myself and I'm just very sure of my path, even if it looks like no one else's. And I think that's the point of wildness and really tuning into who you really are. That is that magic point. Because we live in a world that rewards detachment, right? We're always hearing, be productive, be logical, don't take it personally. Well, sometimes you do take it personally, and sometimes you do feel deeply because you care. And I don't think that's a flaw. I think it's a gift. And that's why I love astrology. Astrology doesn't ask you to be one thing. It literally reflects your multidimensionality. Your Mars might be extremely fiery, and your moon might be extremely watery and poetic. And that's not confusion, that's complexity. That's permission to be all of it. And in a stoic world, that's extremely radical. When I read charts or talk about planetary transits, I'm not doing it to sound cute or appeal to the masses. I'm doing it to remind people that the universe has room for their bigness. Your emotions aren't random, they're rhythmic. And your wildness is in alignment with something greater than what the 9 to 5 grind could ever validate. So, normalizing wildness, and what does that look like in real life? So, what does it actually look like to normalize wildness? It might look like crying when you need to cry, even if someone calls you dramatic. It might look like saying, I don't feel safe here, and just leaving. No explanation needed. You listening to your gut, listening to your body, listening to your nervous system when it's telling you something, that's being a wild woman. Letting your body lead instead of your trauma as being a wild woman. You know, you are not the past. You are not what happened to you. And when you fully step into your wildness, you're allowing your body to tell you what it needs instead of the past, in my opinion. It also looks like starting your day with a ritual instead of a mundane routine. And it also looks like wearing what makes you feel juicy and alive, even if it's not appropriate in current day terms. The other day, I was in the middle of making things in my kitchen, and I just stopped and I just started dancing. No music, just vibes. That was my wild. My nervous system needed that release more than it needed me to finish whatever I was doing. And I think in instances like that, I'm shown I'm really living in my wildness, because I just don't think we're taught to dance if we need to dance. We're not taught to stretch if we need to stretch. Go outside and walk barefoot if you need to ground yourself. And the more I do these things that are just natural to me, the more that I'm tuning into my wild, right? Like tuning into the roots of who we were all called here to be, but sometimes in this game of trying to appear like a civilized human, we forget that these things that we naturally want to do are soul memory medicines. Going outside and grounding yourself by touching your feet against the ground, that is soul medicine that has been passed down through eons, and our ancestors knew to do this. Our forebears knew to do this. And it's like, it's not something that's really like should be taught. It's something that you naturally want to do. When babies lay on the grass, they naturally feel calmer. So I feel like we should just be doing the things that feel natural to us, which can be called wild, but really is just a return of our roots. That anxiety that keeps you looping on the what ifs and what if I fail? What if they judge me for, actually pursuing my dreams? Or worse, what if it doesn't work out? Wildness pulls us out of that. She says, well, what if you let it be easy? What if you trust the moment? What if right now is already enough and you don't have to worry about the future? What if you just take aligned action and actionable steps? She reminds us that animals don't panic about winter in the middle of summer. Trees don't stress about whether the leaves will fall or not in the autumn. They trust their rhythm, and we have one too. We've just been trained to ignore it. So, yeah, when I'm feeling anxious, I don't always reach for control. I might reach for breath. I might reach for gentleness. I might reach for bare feet on the ground. I might even reach for the sky and just scream or chant a little bit, because sometimes that's the medicine. So let this episode, this brief but sweet and lovely episode, be a reminder. If you've been stuck, disempowered, numb, or disconnected, maybe it's not because something's wrong with you. Maybe it's because your wild is asking to be let out. Maybe you're not meant to be more disciplined. Maybe you're meant to be more you. The more we attune to our wild nature, the less we operate from fear, the more we move from truth. Because wildness keeps you in the moment, anchored to your body, guided by your inner compass, not the rules of a world that profits off of your doubt. You are allowed to return to yourself. You are allowed to return to the earth, to rhythm, to chaos, to rest, to joy. You're allowed to live a life that's medicine for your soul, even if it makes no sense on paper. The wild woman archetype lives in your gut, your hips, and your heart. And honestly, she's been there the whole time. So this is your permission slip, if you needed it, to go find her and be her. I can give you so many more signs and ways of the wild woman, but honestly, I think it's just returning to yourself and allowing yourself to excavate who you really are before the world told you who you should be. In the last episode, we discussed, how building a rising routine / ritual allows you to show up in the way that you said you would show up in the world. And I think this is tied into that, finding out who we really are, having a self-discovery. I think that's the true definition of returning to the wild archetype. And honestly, I made this episode because I know that more of us are craving wildness. We're craving the smell of fresh earth, right? We're craving the smell of fresh botanicals. We're craving, natural made things over a world that tells us that, like, with all its innovation, we should be doing this. Okay, but What if we return to the things that have always worked instead of trying to always do things in a way that we're being told? What if we just listen to what our body is telling us to do at each moment? To me, that's truly living in your wild and living in the magic of being wild. So that's all I have today. I just really wanted to discuss this because I feel like more of us are somehow wanting the permission to be more wild. We're wanting the permission to truly be ourselves. And I think that once we all collectively return to this wild way of being and see that it's the way we've always meant to live, we can all just be better versions of ourselves. And better versions of ourselves doesn't mean more put together, but to me, it means being more authentic. I truly and deeply hope you enjoyed this episode today. If this resonated with you in any way, share it with a friend who you feel would benefit from tuning more into their wild more. And please be on the lookout for part 2 of this series. And I have deeply enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you so much for even being here and allowing me to muse to you through the airwaves. It's always literally such a pleasure to have these conversations on here because I feel like we're craving this. We're craving this realness. We're craving this deepness, this return to ourselves in a world that's always telling us how to be. And I think the first step is to reclaim your wild and to attune to your wild and to see that this is a part of us that's been begging to come out. Our wild has been begging for us to notice it, to honor it, and to live it. Until next time, I hope that you attune to your wild, that you have a blessed week, and I will speak to you soon. This has been Amayah Monáe with Monáe's Musings. And until we speak again, may your head and your heart speak with one voice. Peace.